Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for August 25th, 2023. It would be virtually impossible in the short space of time I take for the daily update to give you a full detailed picture of the revolution which was launched over the last 3 days in South Africa with the 15th annual conference of the BRICS nations. Remember, BRICS represents Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And their conference this time is taking place in the midst of a profound transformation of international strategic and development policy. And so I would urge you to tune in to our websites, the LaRouche Organization, Schiller Institute, and the Executive Intelligence Review over the next days to get more detailed readings of what actually transpired in these events. But I'll give you a summary which will get to answering many of the questions that I received from you about will this work, what will be the reaction, what actually happened, and so on. So let me get started by just saying that what is clear is that these developments are, as President Putin has said, unstoppable. It's being greeted with great enthusiasm throughout much of the world, including especially in the global south. And it's a source of hope for people who had no hope. Over the last 500 to 600 years, the global south has been subjected to brutal colonial rule, which in general was based on exploiting the natural resources, including the population, with slave labor, cheap labor, and so on, for the benefit of the multinational corporate cartels that were backed by the military force of initially the British Empire, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch empires, the French empires, and then increasingly in the modern period, the British and now the Anglo-American Empire, based in the City of London and Wall Street. They've had their way for 5 centuries. This has now ended, and that's why there's new hope in much of the world, what Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is referred to as the global majority. Now let me start by saying there have been attempts to dismiss the significance of the event. For example, the Biden administration. And Joe Biden has trouble figuring out where he is and whether it's day or night and should he be taking a nap or what he should be doing. But yesterday, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, set out to attempt to dismiss the efforts of the BRICS by contrasting what the BRICS New Development Bank is with the institutions of the Western financial oligarchy, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. And he said the IMF and the World Bank offer, quote, high standard, high leverage solutions for countries, unlike, by implication, the New Development Bank of the BRICS. Now, who's he kidding? Do you think there are people in the developing sector who support the policies of the IMF? Only at the barrel of a gun. The IMF restricts credit, prevents investment in major infrastructure and physical economy, denies the right to modernization, instead sends shovels and solar panels to countries that need nuclear power, tractors, high-speed rail, and so on. So who's Sullivan talking to? Well, he's essentially saying the United States is not going to submit to this new order. But the question that's posed by this is his credibility and the question of what planet is he on. Now, the New York Times and other media have similar kinds of dismissal. They write that it's not going to work, there are too many differences, and so on, presenting the old divide and conquer geopolitical agenda. Now, this was answered by Brazil's President Lula in his final remarks at the summit. He said, quote, our diversity strengthens the fight for a new order which accommodates the economic, geographical, and political plurality of the 21st century. In other words, Lula is talking about the break from the rules-based order, the rejection of the unipolar world, which is asserted by those who say the United States is the only power that can protect so-called democracy. And what do they mean by democracy? The looting that's characterized the last 5 centuries. And what Lula and others were basically saying is, goodbye unipolar order. We don't accept your collapsing rules-based order anymore. Now, one of the things that characterized the discussion was a lot of talk about the spirit of Bandung. This is a reference to the attempt by the non-aligned nations movement in 1955 at a conference in Bandung, Indonesia, which took up the whole question of maintaining neutrality in the face of the 2 blocks that existed, the Soviet bloc and the Western bloc. And this was led by Indonesia, by Yugoslavia, by Egypt, a number of other countries that were committed to the idea that there should be an alternative which is not controlled by either of the 2 blocks, but represents the interests, the common interests of the former colonial nations. Now, this was, you might say, premature because these countries were not strong enough at that time to break the power of the Western financial oligarchy. That's changed. It's changed because of the economic development of China and India, as well as the military development of Russia. And as a result, the West is choosing to go to war with Russia, with China, with any other country which resists the rules-based order, rather than submit to the idea that there's a common interest in nations working together for mutual benefit. Now, Helga Zepp-LaRouche has spoken repeatedly about the importance of the non-aligned movement and this idea that you don't have to choose sides. In fact, look for the common interests of all nations, the common humanity, the fact that we are one human race. And as John F. Kennedy so famously said, we all live on the same small planet, breathe the same air, cherish the same hopes for our children's future, and we are all mortal. That's the spirit with which this conference took place in South Africa. Now, 2 significant developments occurred which defied the narrative coming from the rules-based order. First, it was agreed upon to expand the membership of the BRICS. The nations that were chosen are Argentina, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. 6 new members who will become full-fledged members in January 2024 and will participate in the 16th BRICS conference in Russia next year. There are many other countries that had applied that were not accepted, but were told that they could be included in the future, as the BRICS intend to be inclusive, not exclusive. Now, the second major development takes place around the New Development Bank and its president, Dilma Rousseff, who's the former president of Brazil. She described the New Development Bank as serving as a source for credit for investment, essentially in physical economy, in infrastructure, in manufacturing, in upgrading agriculture, logistical chains, and so on. This is the idea which is explicit in the Belt and Road Initiative of China, but which has been prevented by the conditionality policies of the International Monetary Fund and the Western banks. So this new bank will break the control of credit that's wielded by Western institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and in general by the Western banks. Now it's starting relatively small, 10 to 15 billion dollars equivalent. But what it will do is start issuing bonds in local currencies, which is a way of getting around the dollar control. And Rousseff said that this bank was created by and for developing countries, not for their Western colonial masters, which means that the process underway will be to invest in those areas of a physical economy identified by Lyndon LaRouche as the key to adding value to the economy, especially increases in energy flux density, the use of fossil fuels and other existing technologies, but especially adding in nuclear and ultimately nuclear fusion. It means a rejection of the axioms of the green economy, which is that energy increases will heat up the planet. In fact, the opposite is true. By increasing the efficiency of your energy production, you increase the overall effect of adding value without polluting the environment. It's clear that high temperature processes are less polluting than the burning of biomass, which many global South countries have been forced to accept. So this represents another aspect of the revolution. The idea that it's through scientific and technological progress, not anti-growth policies, that increase the habitability of the earth and the potential for the expansion of the human race at increasingly high standards of living. And related to that is the idea which became very evident at the summit with the landing of the Indian moon module on the moon, that space is the frontier which can be embraced by all countries, as Prime Minister Modi emphasized in his announcement of the importance of the Chandrayaan-3 landing on the moon. So this is where you see the revolution in its most bright, hopeful terms. Now, one question that I received from many of you is, what can we expect will be the Western response to this? What can they do to stop this from succeeding? Well, we've seen the narrative come out, which is it's unworkable. It's a Russia-China attempt to control the agenda. What they're saying is China is trying to use this to expand their imperial looting policies, implying that China has the same intent that the West had. They also throw in there that China and Russia represent a threat to the freedom of the developing sector economies, when in fact it's been the French and the British and the United States that have represent that threat. Just look at Libya. What was Libya's crime? What was Gaddafi's crime? It was talking about economic development with a common currency for Africa backed by gold. And for his commitment to that, he was sodomically raped by Western forces. The nation was destroyed. Slavery was reintroduced. And Libya is a mess. You think people hear Sullivan speak and don't think about what the US, the French, and the British did in Libya? So there will be a reaction from the West of that sort. Using the old British imperial playbook, divide and conquer. For example, what's happening in West Africa now around Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, where you have nations that overthrew the lackey governments of the Western imperial forces. And now there's discussion. Should there be invasion? Should the French go in? And we're seeing a potential for a world war taking place in West Africa. Same thing in Southwest Asia, although that has been shifted dramatically by the Chinese intervention to create a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, both of which nations are now members of the BRICS. Now, the other opportunity, or not opportunity, the other policy of the West is war and color revolutions. We see that from comments yesterday by Secretary of State Blinken, who insisted, in spite of the obvious failure of the counteroffensive in Ukraine that the West has been fanatically supporting with weapons and money, Blinken insisted once again, Russia must be defeated. And this is going to be continuing to be a theme coming from the Western nations. You must support us for freedom and democracy, even though most nations look at this and most of the global South is refusing to support the U.S. NATO policy because they don't see Ukraine as an example of freedom and democracy, but as a continuation of the old system. You also had Baerbock, the pathetic foreign minister of Germany, announcing yesterday support for Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory, including possibly with German weapons. Well, all of this threatens the possibility of a world war, including a nuclear war. How are we going to prevent that? Well, the events of the last 3 days provide the context for the populations in the global north and the Western countries to intervene for their own interests, to take power away from the globalists, to recognize the end of colonialism as an opportunity for Western nations to cooperate with the rest of the world. Many problems remain, especially the stubbornness and the corruption of the Western governments. But we have justice and the future on our side. I'm urging you to join our efforts, the Schiller Institute efforts, the LaRouche Organization efforts, to shift the West into reality and to show that it's not a threat to us coming from China, Russia, the BRICS, and others, but actually an opportunity to return to our best traditions. And for that, I'm once again including in the description box a link to Helga Zepp-LaRouche's appeal to the nations of the global north to give up their imperial delusions and instead to embrace the potential of a cooperative, mutually beneficial relations with the nations of the global south. So thanks for joining me these last days. As I said, keep your eye on our websites for much more in-depth coverage. The Manhattan Project discussion tomorrow. On Saturday, I'll be participating in with Dennis Speed and others to discuss much more in depth what has occurred the last 3 days in South Africa. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche Organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.